This is week 3 of Patrick Lecture 37, and it's about acceptance, right and wrong way. And the subheading is finding dignity with humility. And so this week we're working with dignity with humility. Now, I've been working with words this whole month because these words have tended to trigger people. It's wonderful. It's fascinating. The guide says many times, this is gold. To find an emotional reaction is a wonderful thing. You've got something now you can work on. And so when I notice people being triggered by a certain word, it means there's a lot to work with there. So it's a wonderful thing. It's irritating because you can get distracted by that. And it's hard to put your finger on what the emotional reaction is versus what is going on. So the themes that have been developing this month so far is the idea that, and I'm just going to name generic themes in pathwork. Pathwork invites us to find where we are being distracted, to find where we are superimposing history on the moment instead of seeing what is, to find pride, self-will, and fear, because those will influence our beliefs and our unconscious thought process without shouting and saying, "Hi, I'm pride, I'm going to influence you today." It doesn't do that. So that pride is hidden, it's woven into the fabric of things. And it is difficult to track these things and to find them and basically pull them out. So I always think in terms of gardening terms and weeding, and some weeds send out runners and some have tap roots, and they're meant to survive. They have lots of tricks for survival. And if you want to get rid of them, you've got to deal with what is, which is you've got a very aggressive, capable life form that can very often move past your efforts to get rid of it. So I've got a thing going on in the background that I don't understand, so letting that go. Focus back, Jan. So these emotional reactions, personality distortions based upon our history, our experience, are thrown forwards into the present or the future. And they can confuse things so that we can't see what is. If you can't see what is, it is difficult to see the context that it's happening in, to understand it, to diagnose it, to analyze it. And it is difficult to move forward because you don't even know which way is forward if you don't know where you are and what the context is. So again, I will mention the idea of maps, hiking trail maps, where they have to put an X saying you are here so you can understand what you're looking at and how it relates to where you are. Otherwise, a map doesn't do you a lot of good unless you have some landmarks. Seeing what's going on gives you landmarks, and it gives you a way to orient yourself to what is going on. So, get back to the lecture. Acceptance, right or wrong. We worked with the idea of acceptance, which is often seen as a compromising word, a word of last resort. It has connotations, energetic connotations of surrender, retreat, giving up, resigning. That's not what the word means, but it's loaded culturally. And we can't ignore that loading of that word. Now, in this section, we've got dignity with humility. So again, in the study guide, I put in definitions. And dignity, according to a very straightforward dictionary that I like to use, is the state of being worthy of esteem or respect, inherent nobility and worth. A lot of Patrick lectures are, their focal point is to help people understand and accept that they are divine beings, that we're not loose kindergartners that need to be rounded up, that we're not escaped prisoners that need to be brought back and judged, that we didn't come here by accident, that this is not a problem that's going to have to be solved one day, that there is an inherent worth, to our existence in our consciousness, which happens to be inside a human being. So inherent nobility and worth, an understanding, a belief in that gives you dignity. Now, notice there's no oomph in that. There's no, and then what do? You don't necessarily do anything. If I believe I have inherent worth and inherent nobility of spirit, even if I've misused it or haven't taken care of it or have been misbehaving, I have inherent nobility and worth. And I just need to find my way back to that. One of the things I tell people is that I don't work with generic therapy. I don't offer generic therapy sessions, and I don't put myself out in that way, because to do the work I do, I need a common belief system. And if you don't believe in it, you need to want to believe in it. So in general, people can say, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in spirit, I don't believe that human beings are the, and you have the right, they have the right to believe that. I don't know what to do with that attitude. I'm not skilled at it. I don't think I have the necessary talent and skill and training to deal with an attitude that believes that or is based on that. I do have developed skills at encouraging people who are worried, who have doubts, who have second thoughts, who have false beliefs, but inherently they're willing to consider that they have inherent nobility and worth. But if they've given it up and they've been in another belief system for a long time, that's difficult. It's difficult to train yourself out of that thought pattern. So again, Patrick spends a lot of time on subconscious, unconscious thoughts and beliefs because we're not conscious of them and they were formed before we developed full consciousness, and they're running wild. And they will act out and they will surface, but we may not be able to relate why that happened over here, why I behaved that way, why I instigated that dynamic. We may not be able to understand the cause and effect scenario and trace it back. In summary, this work is hard work. In a lot of the introductions to lectures, the guide spends at least the first page congratulating the people that are listening in their search, in their work, trying to explain that it is an extraordinarily powerful spiritual good that people are attempting to understand themselves, understand their positive intent, and enlarge it. He says hundreds of times that we have no idea how powerful this positive intent can be. But at one point he does use numbers. I like numbers. At one point he does use numbers, and he says if 10% of the people on the planet believed this and acted as if they believed it, you wouldn't have nearly the problems that you have right now. Now that sounds like a small number. It's actually quite huge. Think of things that are happening in the world where 10% of the people believe in a certain thing, and notice how many events get attached to that. It's pervasive. Now, I don't want to go into examples, but my invitation is to not snort at the idea that 10% of humanity can change the world, to consider whether that might be true. In fact, he says less than 10% would do it, but I know at one point he said 10%. So back into dignity with humility. We need to establish for ourselves, we need to root out the difficulty we have believing that we have inherent nobility and worth. Then with humility, what does that mean? Dictionary again, marked by meekness or modesty in behavior. I'm going to let meekness go. Meekness is a troublesome word. For various reasons, I want to let go of meekness, and I want to focus on modesty, marked by modesty in behavior. That is not capitulation. That is not necessarily self-effacing. Could be, doesn't have to be. It is not a matter of allowing people to bully you. It's not a matter of not standing up for your rights. It's simply a modesty in behavior. Now, here's an example of where I go with the discussions that we have throughout the week, working with, trying to work with people about their inherent worth, and then modesty in behavior. The question becomes, why don't you have modesty of behavior? And the answer is because there's a forcing current, there's a fear. And that's where we come right back around in this lecture to pride, self-will, and fear. These are the tools that we overuse. Pride, instead of just being good pride, reasonable pride, I'm proud of my accomplishment. It becomes, I need to be proud of my accomplishment. I need everybody to validate this. It needs to be a marker stuck in the sand that I can rely on. That's not pride. It's a whole different bunch of words that we use the same word. Self-will, there's an inner will, and then there is an outer will. Self-will is about the outer will acting out without being in connection with the inner will. So think of it as we have an ego, and the ego is designed to support spiritual growth. But the ego also has many other things to do, and it gets full of itself. And it starts thinking it's the one that is there to be protected and supported. And so it starts coming up with its own agendas, its own ideas, stops checking in with the inner self, if it ever did. And self-will is activated in self-interest, meaning that the ego is just an earthbound contraption. It doesn't represent the spiritual self, so that it is inevitably about the survival and benefit of the ego. Now, we can be charitable and include other people in that umbrella, but that doesn't change the fact that we're after survival, we're after validation, we're after the self-interest of gaining more of what we believe we want. So that's pride and self-will, fear. I like to joke about these things so that we get down to the basics. Fear is a wonderful thing. You need to be afraid of tigers. You may need to be afraid of snakes and spiders. You need to be afraid of getting burned because recovery will have to be done and skin will be damaged. These are all appropriate things to be afraid of. But what mankind does is we escalate the existential, physical survival fears. We bring them into the philosophical, social, emotional level, and survival emotionally, survival socially, survival professionally, survival of our ideas becomes infused with the same survival techniques, so that anyone criticizing what I say is attacking me and threatening my professional, social, reputational life. So we've escalated on that. You can even escalate into spiritual pride and spiritual fear, where we believe we understand spirit enough so that we know what to do, what not to do, and where it's dangerous. But if you bring it back to pathwork beliefs, there is nothing to fear. Guide says many, many times, there's nothing to fear. It's a benign universe. The negativities that you encounter are partly self-generated. And that is I've discussed that at other times, so I'm not going to go any further on that. But the fear says, oh no, it's an outside force and I need to protect myself from that, emotionally, socially, spiritually, as well as I need to protect as if there was a tiger at my door. So humility marked by modesty in behavior, not arrogant or prideful, is a balancing act. You're never going to be in the perfect place of that. It's always going to move back and forth, a little bit too much, a little bit too less. But that's what we learn. We learn many things during our lifetimes that don't stay the same. And we learn to balance. We learn how to refine our balance. We learn how to cope with new situations. But the idea of stapling yourself to the ground with specific ideas and proofs and validations is a form of spiritual death if it's followed to its absurd logical conclusion, which I love to use that when talking to people, because in the moment, an argument can sound great because we haven't worked it out. We haven't set it in motion and let it go on autopilot yet. So that's another good way to look at some of these things, is imagine some things that have been on autopilot, where you put a law in the books and it roars ahead and it creates unintended consequences. And then we have to deal with that. But if we just let it go, saying, well, that's better than nothing, then we wind up being choked by our own positive intentions to organize our society, just as an example. So, a lot of examples. Very interesting lecture. Thank you for listening. Pathwork Lecture 37. Please see pathwork.org and download if you'd like to read the whole thing. And thanks for listening.